You know what, I really don't even care about that because Obama has decimated the friggin' Constitution. Obama has decimated the friggin' Constitution.
Obama decimated the friggin' Constitution.
So I don't give a damn because if he doesn't follow the Constitution, we don't have this. We don't have this. We don't have this. We don't have this.
We don't have this.
We never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, and George Herbert Walker, his maternal great-grandfather for whom his daddy is named, were Nazi traitors to the country who should have been tried for treason. Union Banking Corporation. In actuality, it was anything but a bank. It was essentially a Nazi money laundering operation that had a lot of tentacles into a lot of different other businesses. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, 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 Argentina.
A German U-boat pulls into a foreign port, not in Japan or Spain, but in the South American nation of Argentina. Argentina's Juan Perón is an open admirer of Hitler's regime. And the country is already home to many powerful Nazis. In the coming years, many more will arrive, including the wanted war criminals Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the death camps, and Joseph Mengele, dubbed Auschwitz's Doctor of Death.
In Argentina, all the conditions were right to accept Nazi war criminals.
Perón muy hábilmente consideraba que era un deshonor llevar a juicio a un ejército derrotado.
In 2016. Some people say that obviously you're very proud of your family and proud of their accomplishments, but the question is, would it be a political burden? I think it's fair to say that when your brother left the presidency, he was somewhat unpopular. Do you think that there is any Bush baggage? Do you think that would be a problem?
No, I don't think there's any Bush baggage at all. I am proud to be a Bush, and if I run for president, it's not because of something in my DNA that compels me to do it. It would be that it's the right thing to do for my family, that the conditions are right, and that I have something to offer. And that decision will happen, as I said, later on.
On March the 24th, 1976, a military junta headed by General Videla overthrew Argentina's democratically elected government and launched a campaign of terror against all who opposed the coup.
De Dios, quisiera demostrar sobre esta tierra de cuánto es capaz el ejército argentino cuando lucha por la libertad, la paz y la justicia para su pueblo.
In the years that followed, 15,000 people were executed and 30,000 disappeared. 250 concentration camps were set up throughout Argentina, where so-called terrorists were routinely and systematically tortured while being interrogated. A mere wall separated detainees who were blindfolded and tortured from the seemingly normal life of passers-by. Thousands of people accused of terrorism were illegally detained, tortured and killed within these walls. The Argentine armed forces were trained in torture from the 1960s. These torture training sessions were sometimes photographed by those taking part in them. 33 years after the fall of the military regime, only one torturer is in jail.
The significance of the choice of this pope is Matthew Fox. Matthew's written 30 books on spirituality and culture, including The Pope's War. And he was once a Catholic priest, and he is now an Episcopal priest and educator. Thanks very much for joining us, Matthew.
Thank you, Bob. It's sentimentalized by the media, and there's very little critical thinking, and that's one reason I'm glad to be with you, and we can talk about the deeper meanings. Of course, the financial situation of the Vatican is quite scandalous at this time. It needs cleaning up almost as much as the issues of pedophilia and cover-up of pedophilia, and almost as much as the issue of the Inquisition. Because all those three things, and I write about this in my book on the Pope's War, the Inquisition has been brought back in the last 42 years with the last two popes. The Inquisition has been brought back. The Inquisition has been brought back. The Inquisition has been brought back. The financial situation is really scandalous. Just a year or so ago, the Italian government forbade Vatican credit cards to be cashed in any place because there was a whole question of money laundering and all this. And this has been going on for a long time with the Vatican. The lack of transparency about finance. So, and then you have to understand that there's a real link in politics with the Vatican. I point out, for example, under Reagan, the CIA linked up with Pope John Paul II, and they attacked together. They attacked liberation theology-based communities in Latin America, and it really destroyed that whole movement as it was anyway, and replaced it with Opus Dei. Liberation, all of which are extreme right-wing groups that feed, right-wing values, if you will, attitudes of power over, of domination, of patriarchy, and even of fascism, even of fascism. over 105 theologians, I was just one of them, have been silenced or expelled or harassed, hounded, and in the last 42 years under Pope John Paul II and Benedict, and Benedict, when he was head of the Inquisition, he was head of the Inquisition, he was head of the Inquisition, he was head of the Inquisition. They changed the name. It's called the Sacred Doctrine of Faith, but it used to be called the Inquisition. And he led the charge against all of us theologians. And I missed the 105. By the way, there are several good Canadians. And that one of them dropped dead. He died of a heart attack when he was packing his bags for the 6th time to go to Rome to defend his theology. Even though the Second Vatican Council said that theologians were free to think, and there was such a thing as freedom of conscience for everyone. You see, that's what's really happened in the last 42 years, is that I think we've had 2 schismatic popes, because the popes and their curia have taken the real teachings of Vatican II, which were about Reformation in the Church and new thinking and so forth, and link it to the gospel values of social justice. They've taken that and stuffed it. And that's what the silencing of 105 theologians means. So there's no question the Inquisition is back. The Inquisition is back. The Inquisition is back. The Inquisition is back. His actions were not that courageous under the military dictatorship of that Argentina went through in 1983 and so forth. And he's received a lot of criticism for that. Also, he has not backed liberation theology in basic communities. He belongs to this group called Communion Liberation, which is a very right-wing group in Italy. It's compared to Opus Dei. They call it the Italian Opus Dei. And it claims to be lay-based, just like Opus Dei claims, but in fact it's run by clerics. And
just let me jump in for people that don't know. I'm going to say, correct me if I'm wrong, because I certainly have no expertise in this, but Opus Dei represents the far right of the Catholic Church in alliance with the far right of various ruling elites in different countries, and it's a kind of secret conspiratorial and usually up to rather dark and nefarious things.
Well, that's true.
We've seen buildings completely destroyed like this before, but only when done intentionally. Danny Jowenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Het heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Let's compare. Explosives are used to demolish buildings like this in just seconds. Okay, so it's a controlled demolition. What's the problem with that? Well, it happened on the afternoon of 9/11 at the World Trade Center. Let's just think about this. Controlled demolitions cannot be engineered and rigged in a day. It takes months. And therefore, this event must have been planned in advance.
Keep your eye on that building as they coming down.
Hold it back. We are walking back. There's a building about to blow up.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department, and they did use the word, we're going to have to bring it down.
And these people heard explosions.
We heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shockwave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out. The building followed after that.
He takes his hand off, and you hear 3, 2, 1, and it was boom, 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 boom.
And these reporters recognized it as a controlled demolition.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world, using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world. 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York. While in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office, where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001.
Pentagon, the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home, closer to home.
Closer to home.
It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
It's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. To understand how the Pentagon can lose track of trillions, consider the case of one military accountant who tried to find out what happened to a mere $300 million.
We know it's gone, but we don't know what they spent it on.
Jim Minery, a former Marine turned whistleblower, is risking his job by speaking out for the first time about the millions he noticed were missing.
Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes. Osama bin Laden. The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
The end of World War II, both the Americans and the Soviets clearly recognized the superiority of German technology, at least in certain areas. The Americans launched Operation Paperclip, and the Soviets later answered with Operation Solovykin. Both tried to grab as many German scientists as they could before the other superpower got to them.
Operation Paperclip originally started in September of 1946 to bring former Nazi rocket scientists and aeronautical engineers into the United States, and they were actually given political immunity in exchange for technical expertise. It starts up here on the upper left-hand corner. German Air Force, then it goes into the Luftwaffe, German research and technical institutions, German aircraft industry. That flows then to the Air Documents Division, or T2, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And then that gets filtered on to the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, American industry, and universities.
T2 was the Air Technical Intelligence Division of the United States military. Based in Wright, it analyzed all the documents pertaining to Operation Paperclip. It's curious that many of the Nazi scientists that came over as a result of Project Paperclip all wound up in New Mexico, Texas, and Nevada.
In their hands, they hold the simplest object, a paperclip, a symbol of things held together. Learned that during the war, Norwegians put paperclips on their lapels as a sign of solidarity with Jews.
I mean, there's no disputing that the Germans really were 25 years ahead of everybody else.
Think about this. The paperclip represents holding things together. Do you think that it was America's way of saying that they were holding the Nazis and the Jews together? If the Nazis sacrificed the Jews as their immunal calling,
Maybe you've heard of the secret club called Skull and Bones at Yale University and the rumors that members stole the skull of Geronimo. Well, and the secret society known as the Order of Skull and Bones, members of the secret order. One of the alleged grave robbers, Yaley Prescott Bush, the father and grandfather of Presidents 41 and 43.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order. Union Banking Corporation was liquidated by the U.S. government, and Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his holdings in his Nazi business, and that was the beginning of the Bush family fortune for all intents and purposes. Inspiration from what he learned in Skull. George Bush takes his inspiration from what he learned in Skull and Bones and from the Fool Society that Hitler and Goebbels and Goring cut their teeth in, Bohemian Grove, these evil organizations that perpetrate the ugly things that these criminals are doing to this country for which they must be held accountable.
Blood sacrifice. Let's talk about Prince starting off. In 98, 99, Prince would end all his tours with letting the world know what's coming ahead. But no one knew what he was talking about. Check it out.
Recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11.
Yeah. Look, there's time for politics. And, it's time for politics. And it's an absurd insinuation.
On September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country. Americans have known surprise attacks, but never before on thousands of civilians. All of this was brought upon us in a single day, and night fell on a different world, a world where freedom itself is under attack. The terrorists practice a fringe form of Islamic extremism. This group and its leader, a person named Osama bin Laden, are linked to many other organizations in different countries. It is not only repressing its own people, it is threatening people everywhere by sponsoring and sheltering and supplying terrorists.
By sponsoring and sheltering and supplying terrorists.
By aiding and abetting murder, the Taliban regime is committing murder. And tonight, the United States of America makes the following demands on the Taliban. Deliver to United States authorities all the leaders of Al-Qaeda who hide in your land. Release all foreign nationals, including American citizens you have unjustly imprisoned. Protect foreign journalists, diplomats, and aid workers in your country. Close immediately and permanently every terrorist training camp in Afghanistan. and hand over every terrorist and every person in their support structure to appropriate authorities. Give the United States full access to terrorist training camps. Give the United States full access to terrorist training camps so we can make sure they are no longer operating. The terrorists are traitors. The terrorists are traitors to their own faith, trying in effect to hijack Islam itself.
Trying in effect to hijack Islam itself.
The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends. It is not our many Arab friends. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them. Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there.
On October 26, 2001, President George W. Bush signed the Patriot Act, which gave law enforcement broader authority to investigate and prosecute suspected terrorists.
Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the present danger. I commend the House and Senate for the hard work they put into this legislation. Members of Congress and their staffs spent long nights and weekends to get this important bill to my desk. I appreciate their efforts and bipartisanship in passing this new law. I want to thank the Vice President and his staff for working hard to make sure this law was passed. I want to thank the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury for being here, both of whom lead important parts of our war against terrorism. I want to thank Attorney General John Ashcroft for spending a lot of time on the Hill to make the case for a balanced piece of legislation. I want to thank the Director of the FBI and the Director of the CIA for waging an incredibly important part on the two-front war, one overseas and a front here at home. I want to thank Governor Tom Ridge for his leadership. I want to thank the members of Congress who are here on the stage, the leaders on this impressive effort, Senator Hatch and Senator Leahy and Senator Sarbanes and Senator Graham and Senator Reid. I also want to thank Representative Porter Goss, LaFalce, Oxley, and Sensenbrunner for their hard work. The changes effective today will help counter a threat like no other our nation has ever faced. We've seen the enemy in the murder of thousands of innocent, unsuspecting people. They recognize no barrier of morality. They have no conscience. The terrorists cannot be reasoned with. But one thing is for certain. These terrorists must be pursued, they must be defeated, and they must be brought to justice. And that is the purpose of this legislation. Since the 11th of September, the men and women of our intelligence and law enforcement agencies have been relentless in their response to new and sudden challenges. We have seen the horrors terrorists can inflict. We may never know what horrors our country was spared. We're dealing with terrorists who operate by highly sophisticated methods and technologies, some of which were not even available when our existing laws were written. The bill before me takes account of the new realities and dangers posed by modern terrorists. It will help law enforcement to identify, to dismantle, to disrupt, and to punish terrorists before they strike. For example, this legislation gives law enforcement officials better tools to put an end to financial counterfeiting, smuggling, and money laundering. As of today, we're changing the laws governing information sharing. And as importantly, we're changing the culture. Surveillance of communications is another essential tool to pursue and stop terrorists. Existing law was written in the era of rotary telephones. This new law that I signed today will allow surveillance of all communications used by terrorists, including emails, the internet, and cell phones. As of today, we'll be able to better meet the technological challenges posed by this proliferation of communications technology. Investigations are often slowed by a limit on the reach of federal search warrants. Under this new law, warrants are valid across all districts, and across all states. And finally, the new legislation greatly enhances the penalties that will fall on terrorists or anyone who helps them. Current statutes deal more severely with drug traffickers than with terrorists. That changes today. The statute of limitations on terrorist acts will be lengthened, as will prison sentences for terrorists. This bill was carefully drafted and considered, led by the members of Congress on this stage and those seated in the audience. It was crafted with skill and care, determination, and a spirit of bipartisanship for which the entire nation is grateful. This bill met with overwhelming agreement in Congress. This legislation is essential not only to pursuing and punishing terrorists, but also preventing more atrocities in the hands of the evil ones. This government will enforce this law with all the urgency of a nation at war. The elected branches of our government and both political parties are united. It is now my honor to sign into law the USA Patriot Act of 2001.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning into AMTV Alternative Media Television. It is Friday the 13th, 2015. I assume no coincidence. A very unlucky day in the minds of many Westerners. And I think really the superstition kind of arose around the Middle Ages. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that didn't Jesus only have 13 individuals with him at the Last Supper before he was executed and crucified, and then he rose from the dead. Unprecedented coordinated attacks, up to 40, 50 people dead, according to initial reports that I've heard. Multiple locations in Paris, 100 people hostage in a theater. People in a state of panic, watching a casual game of football, what Americans call soccer, between France and Germany. Notably, two allied countries that are behind a coordinated effort in the Middle East right now to fight ISIS. Now, not to discount any of the people dying, any of the people dead. Obviously, this is a tragedy. It's absolutely sick. It's grotesque. This is terrorism. I mean, it really does take us back to the Middle Ages. So I'm not discounting any of that. But upon reading the reports and really getting this news, and I just heard about it. I was actually at the gym, hence the quality of this video and, casual shirt, etc. This is classic Hegelian dialectic. Problem, reaction, solution. Remember, it's the same politicians, Francois Hollande of France, Angela Merkel of Germany, that have been allowing all of these terrorists cross the border. Millions and millions of people from a destabilized Middle East, which is only a byproduct of Western illegal intervention, an attack and war against ISIS in places like the Greater Levant, that has caused this destabilization and pushed all these people over the border so they can take advantage of a system that is allowing them to cross into Europe and into places like the United States. So this is classic problem, reaction, solution. They've created a problem. They've promoted the terrorists to come over. They've kept the borders open. They haven't closed them. And now people are dying. Now there's an unprecedented coordinated attack in Europe. And, God forbid, just like we're seeing in Europe, we could see this in the United States. I hope that doesn't happen. But again, you keep letting all these people over. This, of course, is going to happen. So classic problem, reaction, solution. Now the reaction, obviously, of the American people, the people of Europe, is going to be terror. It's going to be fright. It's going to be, well, now it's justified. Let's go and kill the crap out of these people over in the Middle East. And yes, we all back the wars, even though we didn't before, but because people are dying and they're blowing up movie theaters and innocent people are dying through these coordinated attacks on Friday the 13th, which again isn't a coincidence, not in my opinion, in the least, a very unlucky day. A lot of superstition around it. Again, a lot of this came from around the Middle Ages and, plays into the Christian faith, etc. in this war between radical Islam and Christianity and, the Western belief system and cultural system here in the United States of America. So the solution that the politicians are going to give you is more war. This will only, and attacks like this will only justify further escalation in this part of the world. When in reality, if you're smart enough to read between the lines, and let's just be frank about this, folks, most people out there aren't. I mean, I hate to be so cynical, but most of the droned out masses are too dumb to honestly put two and two together, even though it's just common sense. The solution is going to be war, and this is what the politicians are going to recommend. They're going to provide the solution, when in reality, we should all know, by being thinking, intelligent individuals, it's actually the politicians themselves that are responsible for the deaths of these innocent people, for this terrorism. You see, it's people like Angela Merkel of Germany that really have the blood on their hands. It's people like Francois Hollande of France who really has the blood on his hands. It's people like Barack Obama who truly have the blood on their hands. Remember, Barack Obama has been bombing the shit out of the Middle East illegally, has started a new war in Syria anti-constitutionally through executive action since September 2014 of last year. And guess what's happening now? It's destabilized the region. People are crossing the border. The politicians are allowing the people to cross the border. And with them, it's bringing ISIS and these radical terrorist groups and organizations, which really aren't ISIS. They're just a new spawning of Al-Qaeda. Again, they just changed the name because allegedly Obama killed Al-Qaeda before and murdered Osama bin Laden, even though he's died like 15 times and there was no evidence to prove it, and they kicked his body off a warship without taking a DNA sample or simply giving us a tweet pic. So really, ISIS is just Al-Qaeda. They've just changed the name. They've allowed them to cross the borders into places like Europe because they say it's a humanitarian crisis, and now they're killing people. So we've had the problem. We're going to get the reaction post this terrorist act and this tragic event and tragic day on Friday the 13th. And the solution is going to be offered up on a silver platter to Westerners, to the American people, to those being terrorized currently in France and potentially other places in Europe. And the solution will be war. It'll be more troops on the ground, more boots that are already there, by the way. We'll be arming more moderate terrorists on the ground. There'll be more killing, more bloodshed, more people dead. And of course, this will only foster the growth of more radicalism, more hate, and more terrorism, because we are at war. And it's what the elites have always intended. And through their illegal actions and illegal wars and anti-constitutional invasions, like as the case is Syria, courtesy of Barack Obama, who's really just acting as a dictator. Again, there was no vote. The American people didn't vote for this. Congress didn't approve it. It didn't go through the branches of government. As a byproduct of this, people are dying. People are being terrorized. People are being slaughtered. People are being murdered. So, get this video out to your friends and family. Educate them that this is classic Hegelian dialectic. Problem, reaction, solution. I mean, honestly, folks, I couldn't have written the script better myself. It is a no-brainer. It's so simple, and it's so plain to see. It's as plain as day. Again, my heart and prayers go out to the individuals affected, those being slaughtered by these radicals, by these terrorists. And, it's very sad. It's very tragic. I don't discount that in the bit. But we all know who's truly responsible for these deaths, who's truly responsible for this destabilization, who's truly responsible for these wars. Get it out, make it viral, hard-hitting in your face. I'm Christopher Green. You've been tuning in to AMTV Alternative Media Television. Peace.